"They left me to drown," I whispered, my throat raw with salt water and rage. My son and daughter-in-law stood on the dock that morning, watching me struggle, their faces cold and unfeeling. They thought the tide would finish me, that their secret plan would sink with my body. But later that night, when they returned home laughing, the last thing they expected was a knock at the door, me standing there in my soaked cardigan, with 2 police officers at my side. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share is the story of how I survived the water and destroyed the people who wanted me gone. The day it all began was bright and deceptively beautiful. The ocean sparkled under the summer sun, seagulls wheeled overhead, and the salty breeze carried memories of my younger days. I was 78, silver hair combed neatly back, dressed in a blue cardigan and a floral skirt my late husband had always loved. My son Andrew had invited me out for a family day at the coast. His wife Marissa fussed over the picnic basket, her smile too tight, her eyes darting in ways that set my nerves on edge. Ethan, my grandson, had declined the trip at the last minute, which was unusual. He always loved the ocean. Perhaps that was my first warning. We drove to the pier, the car radio buzzing with static as Andrew talked about investments and future plans. I tried to listen, but something about Marissa's silence unsettled me. She kept glancing at Andrew, as though silently rehearsing lines of a script. When we arrived, the boat rocked gently at the dock, a small craft Andrew had rented. I hesitated, clutching my cane, but Andrew grinned. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll take care of you. You'll love this." I wanted to believe him. He was my boy, after all. Once we were on the water, however, things shifted. Andrew's cheerfulness grew forced, his laughter brittle. Marissa leaned against the rail, her phone in hand, texting furiously. I sat quietly, enjoying the view, trying to push away the unease gnawing at me. "Mom," Andrew said suddenly, his tone sharp. "Come take a look over here. The view is amazing." I shuffled toward him, my cane tapping lightly on the deck. Marissa moved behind me. That's when I felt it, a sudden brutal shove. My body lurched forward, arms flailing. The world tilted, the sky and sea blurring together. Then icy water swallowed me whole. I screamed, but the waves drowned my voice. Salt burned my throat, my lungs. Panic surged as I kicked, clawing for air. Above me I glimpsed them, Andrew and Marissa, standing at the rail watching. His face blank. Hers twisted into a cruel smirk. They didn't move. They didn't throw me a line. They just watched. I thrashed, heart hammering, the weight of betrayal heavier than the ocean dragging me down. My son. My own son. The current pulled me under once, twice. My chest screamed for air. The last thing I saw before darkness closed in was Andrew turning away. But fate wasn't finished with me. When I woke, I was on the rocky shore, coughing violently, every breath slicing my chest. A fisherman, a stranger with weathered hands and kind eyes, had seen something bobbing in the waves and dragged me out. He saved me when my own blood had left me to die. As he wrapped me in his old coat, I clutched his sleeve, shaking. They pushed me. My son. His wife. They tried to kill me. The fisherman's expression darkened. "Then you need to go to the police." I nodded, but deep inside, a fire burned hotter than fear. It wasn't enough to tell. I needed them to see me again, alive when they expected me dead. I wanted to watch their faces crack when the law they thought they'd escaped came knocking. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I stayed with the fisherman and his wife for the night. They gave me dry clothes, warm tea, and space to breathe. But as I lay awake in their guest bed, the images replayed, the shove, the water, Andrew's cold eyes. This wasn't just greed. This was calculation. They had wanted me gone, not just for the inheritance, but because I stood in their way. I knew too much about their debts, their schemes, their whispered arguments about money. And now I knew what I had to do. By dawn, I was ready. I took the fisherman's phone and called the police. I told them everything, the boat, the shove, the cold indifference on Andrew's face. The officer's voice on the other end was clipped and serious. "We'll send someone to take your statement. Stay where you are." But I wasn't going to stay. No. I wanted to walk into Andrew's perfect little suburban home myself. I wanted him to open that door, expecting silence, expecting freedom, and find me there instead. Alive. When the officers met me at the fisherman's cottage, I was already dressed in my blue cardigan again, my cane steady in hand, my pearl earrings shining faintly in the morning light. I gave them my statement, every detail burned into memory. They exchanged grim looks, nodding. One of them asked, "Do you want us to go in first?" I shook my head. No. He needs to see me. He needs to know he didn't win. That evening, when Andrew and Marissa pulled into their driveway, their laughter echoing from the car, they found police waiting at the curb. And me, standing by the porch, my cane planted firmly, my eyes never leaving theirs. The moment Andrew saw me, his face drained of color. Marissa froze, her keys slipping from her hand. "Surprise," I said softly. "Didn't expect me at the door, did you?" The officers stepped forward. "Andrew Carter, Marissa Carter, you're under arrest for attempted murder." As the cuffs clicked shut around their wrists, I watched Andrew's face twist with fury, with fear, with disbelief. For once, he couldn't talk his way out. For once, my voice was louder. And in that moment, soaked not with seawater but with justice, I felt something colder than the ocean and sharper than betrayal. I felt victory. The moment the handcuffs clicked shut, I felt a shiver run through me, not from fear, but from a strange kind of release. For the first time since those icy waves dragged me down, I was the one in control. Andrew's face told me everything. He had never expected me to live, much less to stand there with officers flanking me. But police work is slower than justice in a mother's heart. They read Andrew and Marissa their rights, loaded them into the back of the cruiser, and promised me, "We'll keep you updated on the charges." That was it. Just procedure. For them, it was routine. For me, it was life and death. And deep down, I knew this wasn't finished. The next day, I sat at the police station for hours giving my statement. My cardigan smelled faintly of seawater still, even after the fisherman's wife had washed it. I sat at a steel desk, a tired officer typing as I spoke. I repeated every detail, from the moment Andrew invited me on that boat, to the push, to the cold silence in his eyes as I went under. But when the officer leaned back and sighed, my stomach turned. "Mrs. Carter, without witnesses or physical evidence, it's going to be tough. It's your word against theirs." My heart sank. "You think I imagined this? That I slipped and dreamed they left me to die?" The officer raised a hand. "Ma'am, I didn't say that. But the defense will. And they'll hammer it." That's when it hit me, surviving wasn't enough. If I wanted justice, I'd need more than words. I'd need proof. That evening, I returned to my house. The silence was deafening, every corner carrying memories of Andrew as a boy, the way he used to sit on the porch with a toy sailboat, the way he laughed when I made him apple pie. How had that child grown into the man who shoved me into the sea? I sat at the dining table, hands trembling over a photo album. I flipped through pages of birthdays, Christmases, fishing trips. Then I stopped. One picture made my chest tighten, Andrew at 15, standing on that same pier where he later betrayed me. Back then, his smile was real. I whispered to the photo, "Why, Andrew? Why did you trade love for greed?" But pictures don't answer. The next morning, Ethan arrived. My grandson, the one who had stayed behind that day, burst through the door, his face pale. "Grandma," he gasped. "Is it true? Did Dad really?" He couldn't finish the sentence. His throat closed around the word. I rose slowly, leaning on my cane, and pulled him into an embrace. "Yes, Ethan. He tried. But he failed." Ethan pulled back, his eyes blazing with hurt and fury. I knew they were acting weird lately. The fights about money, the late-night calls. I thought it was just bills. But this? Attempted murder. I nodded grimly. "Your father and Marissa think everything is theirs by right, my house, my savings, even my life." Ethan clenched his fists. "We'll make them pay, Grandma. I swear it." In his voice, I heard something I thought I'd lost, hope. A week later, Andrew and Marissa were out on bail. Their lawyer was slick, his words oiled with charm. He spun the story into an accident, claiming I had slipped on the wet deck. A tragic misunderstanding, he called it. The papers ran with it. Neighbors whispered. Some shook their heads with pity, others avoided my eyes entirely. Betrayal hurts worst when people doubt your pain. One afternoon, I found a note slipped under my door. "Drop this. You're too old to fight." No name, no signature, but the handwriting was Marissa's. My hands shook, but not from fear. From rage. That night, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, the note between us. "We need more," he said. "More than words, more than your testimony. Something they can't deny." I looked at him, really looked, and realized how much he'd grown. His jaw was set, his eyes fierce. He wasn't a boy anymore, he was a man standing shoulder to shoulder with me. "You're right," I said. "We'll find it. We'll prove what they did." And in that moment, a new fire lit in my chest. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for him, for the legacy Andrew had tried to poison. The next day, I started digging. Bills, bank statements, documents Andrew had once left lying around when he visited. I pieced together fragments of debts, shady investments, names I didn't recognize. Ethan scoured Marissa's social media, finding posts that seemed innocent until you looked closer. Lavish dinners, expensive handbags, all purchased while their accounts were drowning in red. Then Ethan found something chilling, a string of texts between Marissa and Andrew's business partner. They mentioned closing the deal and final payout after Mom's gone. Ethan slammed his laptop shut, his voice shaking. "There it is, Grandma. Proof they wanted you dead." My hands tightened around my cane. "Then we'll use it. But not yet. Not until they feel the ground crumbling beneath their feet." Because revenge, I realized, isn't just about striking back. It's about making them watch the walls close in, one brick at a time. A few nights later, I saw headlights sweep across my window. I peeked through the curtains. Andrew's car idled at the curb. He sat inside, his silhouette motionless, watching my house. I refused to flinch. I switched on every light in the house, walked deliberately to the front window, and stared back until he finally drove away. Let him see me alive. Let him feel the weight of his failure. Days turned into weeks. The case crawled forward, lawyers playing their games. But I was patient. Patience is a grandmother's weapon. We know how to wait, how to endure, how to strike when the moment is right. And then the moment came. Ethan handed me a small USB drive. "I hacked Dad's cloud account," he whispered. "You need to see this." I plugged it into the computer, and the screen lit with video. Grainy footage from Andrew's phone, recorded the day of the boat trip. At first it was just waves, Marissa laughing, Andrew talking. But then, clear as day, it showed him turning to her and muttering, "Once she's gone, everything's ours." I froze, my hand covering my mouth. There it was. Proof. Not just my word. His. The next morning, I called the police. "I have new evidence," I told them. "Evidence that will bury Andrew and Marissa." And as I held that USB drive in my hand, I felt the tide shift. They had left me to drown. But now, they were the ones gasping for air. The morning I carried that USB drive to the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. My cane tapped firmly against the marble steps as Ethan walked beside me, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with the kind of determination that comes only from betrayal turned into resolve. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters filled the benches, neighbors whispered, and at the defense table, Andrew and Marissa sat side by side, their lawyer shuffling papers with an oily smile. Andrew's face was pale, his lips pressed thin. Marissa, though, wore a smirk, as if she still believed she could charm her way out of hell. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart pounded, but I stood tall, gripping my cane like a staff. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about every parent who'd ever been betrayed by their own child. The prosecution began with my statement. I rose slowly, swore on the Bible, and sat in the witness chair. The prosecutor's voice was calm, steady. "Mrs. Carter, can you tell the court what happened on the day of June 4th? I nodded, my throat dry, but my voice firm. "My son invited me on a boat trip. He told me it was for family. Once we were far enough out, he and his wife pushed me overboard. They stood there as I fought for my life. They didn't throw me a rope. They didn't call for help. They left me to drown." The gallery gasped, but I kept my gaze locked on Andrew. His face was stone, but his eyes flickered, just enough for me to know my words struck. The defense lawyer rose, his smirk widening. "Mrs. Carter, Isn't it possible you slipped? Boats are dangerous places for the elderly, after all. A ripple of laughter swept the courtroom. I gripped my cane harder, fury simmering. If I had slipped, my son would have helped me. He wouldn't have turned his back. The lawyer leaned closer. You have no proof of that, do you? I smiled faintly. Not until now. The prosecutor turned to Ethan, who stepped forward, holding the USB drive. My grandson's hands trembled, but his voice was steady as he explained how he'd found the recording. The judge allowed it to be played. The courtroom fell silent as the screen flickered to life. Andrew's voice, clear as day, filled the air. Once she's gone, everything's ours. Marissa's laugh followed. Finally. No more waiting. The gallery erupted. Gasps, whispers, even shouts. The judge banged his gavel for order, but the damage was done. Andrew's face drained of all color. Marissa clutched his arm, her smirk finally cracking into panic. For the first time, their lies had weight pressing against them, undeniable, inescapable. But the defense didn't give up easily. They claimed the video was doctored, that Ethan had fabricated evidence to frame his father. They even accused me of manipulating my grandson to turn against his parents. It might have worked, until the prosecutor dropped the second bombshell. A forensic expert confirmed the video's authenticity. The file contains no edits, no alterations. The voice prints match Mr. Andrew Carter and Mrs. Marissa Carter conclusively. The defense lawyer stammered, his slick composure slipping. Andrew buried his face in his hands. Marissa's nails dug into the table. During a recess, I stepped into the hallway, leaning on my cane, my body trembling from adrenaline. Ethan stood close, his hand steady on my arm. You were amazing, Grandma, he whispered. I shook my head. It's not over yet. They'll fight harder now. Cornered rats always do. He squeezed my hand. Then let them. We have the truth. But truth alone doesn't shield you from danger. As we turned back toward the courtroom, I saw him, the slick-haired man I recognized from the pier, one of Andrew's so-called business partners. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on me like a predator watching prey. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His smile said it all. This isn't finished. Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor pressed harder. They presented bank statements showing Andrew and Marissa's crushing debts, the shady investments, the life insurance policy Andrew had taken out in my name without my knowledge. The jury's faces darkened with every detail. Finally, the prosecutor asked me one last question. Mrs. Carter, what do you want from this court today? I looked at Andrew, then at Marissa. My voice was clear, strong. I want justice. Not just for me, but for my grandson. For every parent who gave everything, only to be discarded like trash. I want the court to see that greed doesn't excuse betrayal. That blood doesn't excuse attempted murder. The gallery erupted again, the judge struggling to maintain order. But I didn't care. My words were out, sharp and undeniable. The defense called Andrew to the stand. His lawyer whispered frantically, but Andrew's face was twisted with rage. He tried to spin it. He said he'd been joking. That the recording was taken out of context. That he would never harm his own mother. But every word dripped with desperation. Every denial sounded thinner than the last. Finally, the prosecutor asked, if you never intended to hurt your mother, why didn't you call for help when she went overboard? Andrew froze. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. The silence stretched. The jury stared. And then, like a balloon popping, he snapped. Because she was in the way, he shouted. She was ruining everything. The room exploded with gasps. Andrew's lawyer buried his face in his hands. The judge banged the gavel furiously, but it didn't matter. The truth had ripped free. That night, as Ethan and I returned home, the air felt different. Lighter. But danger still lurked. I could feel it. A note was taped to my door. Just 3 words, you'll regret this. My hands shook, but I tore it down, crumpled it, and tossed it into the fire. Because I knew something now that they didn't. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was winning. The morning after Andrew's outburst in court, the neighborhood was buzzing. Some neighbors avoided me entirely, others knocked on my door just to whisper what they'd seen in the papers. Did you really hear him admit it, Ruth? What happens now? I told them all the same thing, the truth will come out. But behind closed doors, I was anything but calm. Because while the court dealt with Andrew and Marissa, I had felt the gaze of something bigger, the slick-haired man in the hallway, the partners Andrew had tangled himself with. Greed doesn't grow in a vacuum. My son hadn't just betrayed me for money, he'd tied himself to people who knew how to make problems disappear. People who wouldn't think twice about silencing an old woman and her grandson. That night, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, the only light coming from a small lamp. The house creaked with the weight of years, but tonight it felt like it was listening. He tapped the table nervously. "Grandma, we can't ignore this. That guy at the courthouse, he was watching you." "I know," I said softly, gripping my cane. "That's why we need to be louder than ever. Silence is their weapon. Exposure will be ours." Ethan frowned. "But if we push too hard, they'll come for us." I leaned forward, my eyes steady. "They already are. You saw the note." He went quiet, then nodded. "So we fight." I smiled faintly. "We fight." 2 nights later, the fight found us. I was jolted awake by a noise, a faint rattle at the back door. My heart thudded. I slipped from bed, gripping my cane, and tiptoed down the hall. The kitchen clock ticked louder than my breath. Then through the glass, I saw a shadow. A man, crouched, tools in hand. "Ethan." I hissed. He burst from his room, baseball bat in hand, his eyes wide. The lock clicked. The door swung open. And there he was, the broad-shouldered thug I'd seen outside the warehouse weeks ago. His smile was a predator's. "Evening, Grandma. Time for a little talk." Before he could step in, Ethan swung the bat with a crack. The man cursed, stumbling back, blood on his cheek. We slammed the door and bolted it, our hearts racing as his fists pounded against the wood. Then, silence. Minutes later, the sound of a car peeling away. We stood in the kitchen, breathing hard, adrenaline buzzing through our veins. "They know where we live," Ethan whispered. I gripped his arm. "Then we'll make sure the whole world knows where they hide." The next day, I called the DA. I told him about the break-in, about the threats. He sighed heavily. "Mrs. Carter, this case is already volatile. You and your grandson need protection." "I don't need protection," I snapped. "I need justice." Still, they assigned us a police escort. For a week, a cruiser sat outside my house, officers shadowing me everywhere. Neighbors gawked. Marissa's friends hissed. But I held my head high. Andrew had left me to drown. Now it was his turn to feel the water rising. But even under guard, the threats kept coming. Anonymous calls at night. A dead fish left on my porch. Once a rock shattered the front window, a note tied to it, "Stop, or next time it's your grandson." Ethan was shaken, but he didn't flinch. "They want us scared, Grandma. Let's scare them instead." That night, we sat together and built our weapon. We gathered everything: Andrew's debts, Marissa's texts, the video, the threats, even photos of the thug at our door. Ethan turned it into a digital storm, uploading files, setting up automatic emails, timing posts to release if anything happened to us. It wasn't just insurance, it was a noose. One tug from them, and the whole world would see. Court resumed the next week. The air was thicker, tenser. The jury had seen the video, heard Andrew's slip, but the defense clung desperately to their narrative of misunderstanding. I sat in the gallery, cane resting across my lap, my gaze fixed on my son. He looked smaller now, his suit rumpled, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Marissa still tried to smile, but it cracked every time she glanced at the jury. Then the prosecutor dropped the final card, the digital evidence of their debts and texts, authenticated by Ethan. The jury leaned in, whispering to one another. Andrew's shoulders slumped. Marissa's hand trembled as she reached for his, only for him to pull away. Their alliance was fracturing. During recess, I stepped outside for air. The sun was bright, but I felt the weight of eyes again. Across the street, the slick-haired man leaned against a lamppost, smoking. He tipped his hat to me with a mocking grin. I lifted my cane, pointing it directly at him. My voice carried, cold and sharp, "You'll drown too." His grin faltered. Just for a moment. Then he flicked his cigarette and walked away. Ethan, watching from the doorway, whispered, "Grandma, that was badass." I chuckled softly. Sometimes, child, you have to remind the wolves that you still have teeth. The trial dragged on, but the tide had turned. Every day, more cracks appeared. Andrew grew quieter. Marissa grew meaner, snapping at their lawyer, glaring at the jury. Their friends abandoned them, their allies disappeared. But revenge isn't just about watching them fall. It's about making sure they land where they can never hurt you again. So I planned. Quietly, carefully. When the verdict came, I'd be ready. The night before the final session, I sat in my armchair, firelight flickering, the fisherman's old coat folded neatly across my lap. I thought about that day on the water, the cold, the waves, the silence of my son's betrayal. And I whispered to the flames, "Tomorrow, you'll drown in front of everyone." The courthouse was standing room only on verdict day. Reporters jostled for space, neighbors whispered, and even strangers filled the benches, hungry for the ending of a story that had gripped the whole town. The hum of voices echoed off the tall ceilings, the air thick with tension. I sat near the front, my cane planted firmly on the marble floor, my cardigan buttoned neatly, pearls at my ears. Ethan sat on my right, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward the defense table where his father sat. Andrew looked hollowed out, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. Beside him, Marissa twisted her hands in her lap, her lipstick smudged from biting her lips raw. The bailiff called the court to order. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. My heart thumped so loudly it seemed the entire room must hear it. The foreman rose. "We, the jury, find the defendants, Andrew Carter and Marissa Carter." The pause was endless, stretching like a noose tightening. "Guilty on all counts." The room exploded. Gasps, shouts, even a few cheers. The judge banged his gavel furiously, calling for order, but my focus was on Andrew and Marissa. Andrew's mouth dropped open, his hand shaking as he grabbed the table. Marissa let out a strangled cry, her eyes wide with disbelief. The lawyer slumped in his chair, defeated. Ethan gripped my hand tightly. "We did it, Grandma," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. But my gaze never left Andrew. I wanted him to look at me. I wanted him to see the mother he had left to drown standing taller than ever. Slowly, his eyes met mine. For a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the child who laughed on the pier, the teenager who hugged me after his father's funeral. And then I saw the man he had become, twisted by greed, poisoned by Marissa's ambition. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I only stared, unflinching, until the bailiffs took him away. Outside, the courthouse steps were a storm of cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions, flashes popped, voices rose in a frenzy. "Mrs. Carter, how do you feel? Do you think justice was served? What do you say to your son's conviction?" I lifted my chin, my voice strong and steady. "I say this, when family betrays you, when they leave you to drown, you don't let them. You fight. You survive. And you make sure the world knows the truth." The crowd erupted, the cameras flashing brighter. Ethan slipped his arm around my shoulder, shielding me as we made our way through the chaos. But justice in court was only part of the story. Because the Carver men, the slick-haired predators who had loomed in the shadows, were still out there. They had threatened me, stalked me, tried to break into my home. And though Andrew and Marissa were locked away, I knew the Carvers wouldn't forgive exposure so easily. That night, the police cruiser assigned to watch my house doubled its patrol. Still, I sat awake in my armchair, the fire crackling, my cane leaning against my knee. On the table beside me sat the USB drive and the fisherman's coat. Symbols of survival. When the knock came at midnight, I didn't flinch. I opened the door to find the slick-haired man standing on my porch, his smile sharp. Behind him, two others loomed. "You got your justice," he said smoothly. "But now it's time to let it go. Drop the noise, or we'll make sure you regret it." I stepped closer, my cane steady, my eyes burning into his. "I didn't survive the ocean to be scared of men in cheap suits." His smile faltered. And that's when the porch lights flared and police officers emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. Hands where we can see them. The Carver men froze, caught. I allowed myself a small smile. You should have known better than to threaten a grandmother who's already drowned once. The next weeks were a blur of headlines. Local syndicate exposed after courtroom drama. Grandmother's courage brings down crime ring. Andrew and Marissa were sentenced, 15 years for him, 10 for her. The Carvers, with the weight of evidence stacked against them, faced decades more. Neighbors who once whispered now stopped me on the street, pressing my hands, thanking me. "You're an inspiration," they said. "You proved age doesn't mean weakness." But for me, it wasn't about being an inspiration. It was about survival. About reclaiming the dignity my son had tried to steal from me. One evening, weeks after the trial, Ethan and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and crimson. He leaned back in his chair, his face finally relaxed, free of the fear that had haunted him for months. "Grandma," he said softly, "you didn't just survive. You won." I looked out at the horizon, the salty breeze carrying memories of that terrible day on the boat. "Winning doesn't bring back what I lost, Ethan. But it reminds me of what I still have." He turned to me, his eyes filled with warmth. "You still have me." I reached over, squeezing his hand. "Yes. And that's worth more than any fortune Andrew thought he could steal." Later that night, as I sat by the fire, I took out the fisherman's coat one last time. I ran my hands over the worn fabric, remembering the moment he dragged me from the water, the moment a stranger saved me when my own son had left me for dead. I whispered to the silence, "Thank you." Then I folded the coat neatly and placed it back in the chest. Not as a symbol of pain anymore, but of survival. Because I knew this: betrayal can wound, greed can drown, but truth will always rise to the surface. And I, an old woman they thought too weak to fight, had risen with it. The world would remember Andrew and Marissa for their crimes. But they would remember me for something else. For refusing to drown. For standing at their door with the police. For proving that even when blood betrays you, justice will find a way.